John, swift news moving quickly. Now, this canvassing board that you mentioned is meeting right now consists of three people: Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, Attorney General Steve Marshall, and Secretary of State John Merrill. They are beginning to certify the results from that special election earlier this month. But what had happened is Republican Roy Moore had filed a last-minute complaint with the Alabama Circuit Court to intervene and delay this certification based on new allegations of voter fraud and actually calling for a new special election. But just moments ago, Montgomery Circuit Judge Johnny Harwick denied Moore's request for a restraining order to stop the canvassing board from certifying Jones's victory. That means that Doug Jones, by the end of this hour, will likely be headed to Washington, where he will be sworn in by Vice President on January 3rd next week. Secretary Merrill's office spoke with me several times today as I tried to understand why this was occurring. Just a quick primer in Alabama state law: you have 48 hours after certification to petition for a recount. There was no circumstances for a recount, so Moore did this last-minute effort. However, Secretary of State Merrill's office, John, told me that they have reviewed all allegations of voter fraud and found that there were no instances of that. Now, Moore's campaign issued a statement today saying that Alabama will suffer irreparable harm if election results are certified without preserving and investigating all the evidence of potential fraud. I can tell you, in talking with Merrill's office, they see that as an affront to the election integrity, if you will, of Alabama. They have prosecuted at least 6 people in recent elections for these sorts of things. But we also have Jones's campaign weighing in, and the spokesman there, Sam Coleman, saying this is just a desperate attempt by Roy Moore to subvert the will of the people. It will not succeed. The election is over. It's time to move on. So there you have it all, John. And that meeting that it is going on, it takes about 30 minutes. They have the formalities of a Pledge of Allegiance and invocation, and then they have an actual reading of the explanation of the certification for an election like this. Then those 3 members, the governor, the attorney general, and the secretary of state, will sign those results. They will become official, and there will be nothing left to do in Alabama. It then comes to Washington. This election means that Republicans in the Senate, of course, will only have 1 vote to spare in that slim margin. John?
So we're watching pictures from Montgomery as the state certification board gets ready to certify the election results in that state. Griff, you know, one of the things that the Moore campaign charged in their challenge to the certification was that turnout was higher than expected. Well, is that any great surprise? I mean, national attention, international attention was paid to this race.
That's right. It got a lot of attention, and actually the allegations in the 80-page complaint that I read earlier this morning is that there were a lot of alleged out-of-town people because the numbers were so large. But again, Secretary of State Merrill's office finding no indication of that being true. And the court actually, it's interesting that the court ruled just moments before this certification meeting began, John, because there was no onus, there was no determination that the court had to rule, and certainly the Secretary of State's office wasn't going to stop unless that court intervened. I talked to one political consultant, if you will, that said they felt that Moore's attempt was really more of a laying of the ground for perhaps future claims that Jones was in some way not legitimately elected, to somewhat muddle the process. But again, Moore's campaign not telling me anything to that effect.
So they're taking the Pledge of Allegiance there as they get ready to certify these votes. And, you know, talking about certification, Griff, 20,000 votes, that is well beyond the margin that would have demanded an automatic recount, right?
That's exactly right. And to narrow that down, you would have had to in some way make the case that some of those, the majority of those 20,000 were not legitimate voters. And in the 80 pages I read, it certainly did not meet that standard in any form. This meeting we're watching way takes about, Merrill's office tells me, about 30 to 40 minutes tops, but essentially it's a formality again. We're watching. It's not that anything is going to happen now in the next 30 minutes, half an hour or so, because they would essentially just sign it. It's sort of like when the president signs a piece of legislation that's already been voted by both sides of the Senate and the House. It's just a signature, but they add some formalities to it. That is what you see going on right now. And it looks like some signatures, so perhaps they're actually moving things quicker to hurry up and get this out of the Alabama hands and into the Washington hands.
It's my understanding that under Alabama law, the Jones campaign, or rather, I'm sorry, the Moore campaign, can petition for a recount within 48 hours of this certification. Based on everything they've done so far, we can certainly expect to see that, I would think. Griff Jenkins.